Good morning. Happy Thursday and happy Family Caregivers Month. My name's Wendy Johnstone, and I'm a provincial consultant as well as a caregiver coach with Family Caregivers of British Columbia. Uh, I'm We've banned my dog from the couch upstairs because it's been rainy and it's really muddy. And so now he's pacing around the office and at my feet and pawing me right now, which you can't see. It's all happening below me. Anyway, I just hope he doesn't start whining or barking. So be patient with the poor dog whose routine has been altered on this fine spring day. Today, we are talking about juggling work and care, and we're going to present 5 strategies that you can consider in planning and in connecting with your workplace around their policies and ideas around how to support you as a working caregiver, as well as hopefully reducing or managing your stress levels. So, 1 in 3 caregivers are juggling work and care. And the research shows that most caregivers really enjoy their role as caregivers. And by giving back, of course, to the person they're caring for, they often enjoy a strengthened bond with the person they're caring for. However, like many things that we enjoy doing, when it starts to impact other parts of our life, it can often feel, stressful, or it can take its toll on us emotionally and physically. And so for some of us, who are self-employed like myself, I don't have an employer to talk to. Actually have to talk to myself because I'm my own employer around, balancing work and care. But there are many other individuals that are working in a small, business, or they're working in a larger organization that, would have or hopefully have some policies around how to support working caregivers. So we get a lot of calls on our caregiver support line from working caregivers. And one of the things that we often track or talk to them about is how this change in employment has affected them. And one of the main things that we hear is that often family caregivers have to reduce their hours or change their hours to accommodate their caregiving role. Sometimes they have to take a loss of an income, and sometimes that's coupled with actually paying for additional services that maybe the care recipient isn't able to afford if it's an aging parent. Um, Sometimes they have to take, an extended period of time absence from work. And then there are some caregivers that just opt to leave their jobs early because they're just not able to, or they just don't want to necessarily balance the two. What we do know is that, at least a quarter of all working caregivers experience some type of physical or emotional health challenges. And that's the piece that we really want to speak to today around how we can minimize the physical and emotional stress or challenges that can come with trying to balance work and caregiving. So, working our workplaces and care, it's not a homogeneous situation. So, what applies in one workplace doesn't necessarily apply in a different workplace. And of course, as we know, caregiving responsibilities are not, homogeneous as well. They vary depending on the family and the care recipient's illness, the length of time. So there's not really this sort of one catch-all approach. And so we thought we would take one example that we recently heard on the caregiver support line and just sort of walk through the 5 strategies that we actually applied with this caregiver. And so this caregiver's name is Teresa, and she's a full-time manager at a grocery store, and she's caring for her son who has a mental health illness. And what started to happen is that she was having to respond to calls from the different people who were involved in her son's life, whether it was a concerned neighbor, whether it was her son's community support worker, or her son herself when there was a crisis. And so what would happen is she'd have to kind of drop everything, and she would have to leave and go deal with the situation and then come back to work. And so the first couple of times that this happened, there wasn't really much conversation around it. But after the third time, she sort of started to realize that, oh my goodness, I love my work, and I don't want to jeopardize it. She was also a little bit nervous talking to her employer because she had never talked to anybody about her son and his mental health illness, and there was a lot of emotions around that piece that maybe kind of started to bubble up at the surface. But she could recognize that it wasn't looking good for her to have to drop everything and leave the store and leave some of her duties behind on such short notice. So one of the first strategies, of course, is to be honest and proactive. And so in this case, what Teresa did was she realized she had to describe the situation to her employer before it became a larger issue. And she was really focused on the fact that she loves her job. She's very committed, and she wanted to find solutions that were going to work for them and for her. And it's this understanding that it's a process. And so that was the approach that she was taking was, this is a process, and we're both going to be, learning and figuring out how best to, support each other in the process and with her caregiving role, and that she was, her work was, is equally as important to her as her role as a caregiver. So there's we're not experts in workplace policies, and that's not an area that we necessarily have a ton of expertise in. There are some general guidelines around how employers can support family caregivers in their workplace, and that's going to vary again depending on which business the individual's working for. There is this one important component, is that there's a difference between this sort of obligation to care versus a personal choice. And so when caregivers are obligated to care in terms of they've exhausted all other resources, or they are looking at other options to support that individual, that's a really important piece in terms of having that conversation with the employer, that taking time off work is not a personal choice, it's an obligation to the caregiving responsibility. It's also really important, and sometimes I think we generally, naturally, depending on our personalities or how we view the world, sometimes our own strategies of trying to minimize the situation to either help, demonstrate that we're able to balance both is sometimes a strength, but also a blind spot. So when it comes from a place of describing it to an employer, generally what the rule of thumb is to be very clear about what that current role looks like and not to minimize it. I think none of us like kind of surprises, and so it's probably a little better to be more honest upfront in terms of here's the current situation. Obviously we can't predict the future, but not minimizing the impact it's having on you as a person, but also the types of activities that are required. So in Teresa's case, she is the only caregiver for her son. He is her only child, and her ex-husband isn't particularly supportive and not really in the picture. And so she feels quite alone in her role, and she feels like she's taking on, the bulk of the responsibilities. So one of the things that Teresa did, prior to the conversation she had with her employer, is she started to learn about what was available in terms of support. And we talked about this, that every workplace is different. And so she wanted to get informed about what was available on site and what other types of supports were available in the community. Had she exhausted all the different areas through the publicly funded system, through other nonprofit organizations? She thought a little bit about, well, how can I manage my caregiving role and my work responsibilities? Are there some alternatives? What other types of caregiving options are there? Who else is on the care team that could be available to support? So in Teresa's case, it turns out that their workplace didn't have much opportunity with working caregivers, but they actually recognized that this was an opportunity for them both, and so they were very supportive with Teresa, and recognized that, oh, this is probably an area that they could expand themselves, which I think was that's a very positive environment to be working in. So Teresa did some upfront research and she laid out sort of her ideas and thoughts on making sure she had coverage. So in her role, there are certain days where she really can't leave, or she shouldn't leave, because it puts a lot of other individuals in a tricky position, whether there's deliveries coming in, key business meetings. So she sort of looked at her schedule and identified sort of the best days, and then understanding that she can't plan for an emergency, but on the days that were the most hectic, she was able to suggest that they train one other individual that could pick up some of those quick components if she had to leave. And then she really tried to set various other appointments on those less busy days where she could step away from the store for a couple of hours, and had an agreement, or proposed an agreement, that she could do some of that work at home. So that was kind of what she brought forward into the conversations, and that seemed to check off a number of boxes, and then her actual employer had indicated that they were going to do some research on their own end in terms of what other workplaces do, what are the guidelines in British Columbia and Canada, and work towards having more defined policies. So in Teresa's case, when she was looking at her job, she was looking for sort of this backup plan or contingency plan. If she had to leave for an emergency, who else could step in and take on some of her roles and responsibilities? That was one of the key ones that was, I think, the highest concern for both her and her employer. One of the other strategies that we focus on is this idea of adopting some really good documentation skills. And Teresa was the first one to admit that this wasn't an area of her strength. This wasn't a strength area. And but after the conversation she had with our caregiver support line, and she actually did a coaching session with us, she understood that having a dedicated file, and for her, what worked for her was a Google document that she could just add to wherever she was, whether it was out using her phone, whether it was at work, whether it was at home, that she had this running the log, so to speak, on a Google document, and that's what worked for her, and it made it a lot easier for her to track. She was then able to make sure she had all the pertinent information about her son at her fingertips, so in her phone as well, so that if she was called out, then she had that information at her fingertips. But one of the things we talked about in our phone conversation was that the better prepared she is in terms of documentation and tracking changes, the more likely that she could get be less reactive and a bit more proactive in terms of her son's health, and noticing changes and being able to communicate those with the care team. One of the things that came out of our phone call is that Teresa really understood that there was no backup plan for her son if she got sick. And that was something she hadn't really thought about. But being pulled away and throughout our conversation and talking about this idea of contingency planning, she realized, oh my goodness, like I need to figure something out, because if I'm ill or if something happens to me in the long term, who's going to help support my son? So she reached out to us around that piece, and also, gained some further information around how to build, her circle of support. So her informal circle of support, but also, tapping into some additional formal resources as well. And although it wasn't her favorite task, she did indicate that she was going to commit to this Google Sheet, documentation. And it was, part of our conversations in our caregiving session to, remind of the benefits of that documentation piece. So, of course, the last strategy is, finding whatever works for you as a family caregiver to support your own well-being. And in previous Facebook Lives or in previous blogs, we talk about sort of a non-negotiable every day. Sometimes it's thinking about activities that you can do in 5 minutes or in 15. Ways that are going to help support you through transitions. So however that looks for you, trying to implement one of those strategies. It's also, I think, for Teresa and her Google document, the one thing that she did do as well is she had a little space for how she was feeling, and she didn't fill it in every single time. But about once or twice a week, she had may have made a note around if a particular situation alleviated her stress, or if something increased her stress, and that helped her recognize a bit more of where she was at emotionally. And one of the things that came out for her was that she felt quite embarrassed about her son's mental health illness, even though she knew she shouldn't. And so she tapped into her employment assistant program and was able to talk to a counselor for a few sessions. And then she also had a number of caregiving sessions with Family Caregivers of BC. And then long term, she was able to find a virtual caregiver support group in her area that best supported her at that time. And the other thing that she did for herself, and we talked a bit about this in one of our coaching sessions, was she made a commitment to focus on the Bounce Back program through the Canadian Mental Health Association. And just to give her some more strategies to help recognize the signs of stress and how to respond to those in a way that was going to allow her to continue to care and juggle work and focus on her own well-being. So that brings us to the end of our session on juggling care and working. Just a reminder that we've really got your back here at Family Caregivers of BC. We can support you through, helping you build a contingency plan. We can offer you different strategies. We can point you in the right direction around if you're looking at, exploring what some of the policies are in your workplace. Help you think about that conversation with your employer. We've got your back. Whatever it is that you need, we are more than happy to support you. So reach out to us by email, by phone. If you have any other comments or ideas, please put them in the chat box below. I hope you have a wonderful week. I'm glad my dog was on his best behavior. He's at my feet, laying on my feet, which have fallen asleep in the last 10 minutes. But I'll take that over the whining and potential barking. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and we will see you in June. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.